That's why HFO is here. It's 5090. It's 5090.
Good evening. It's Sunday, the 19th of July, and I'm here in a quite warm but comfortable studio to do yet another 5090 show, specially for people who are thinking about or already taking part in 5090, the music songwriting challenge that starts on the 4th of July. And over the 90 days to the 1st of October, the idea is you write 50 songs. Good evening to Ryako Music and an array of emotions who are already in the chat room. Hello, hello to both of you. Notice anything? Yeah. Elbow's really playing up at the moment, and I ended up not only buying myself a brace, but I've also started hitting the Voltarol. Ibuleave and paracetamol tablets aren't doing it. No idea what it is. I suspect it's tennis elbow from playing the guitar 6 hours at a stretch. But one of the lessons that I try to teach other people in these shows is look after yourself, practice self-care. These are not normal times. And expecting your body to do what it normally does in such circumstances is silly. I've done way too much DIY and faffing around with stuff. How bad have I got? Synths behind me. Yesterday I took out the Allen key to adjust the keyboard stand so that all the middle C keys lined up vertically. I really need to get out more. Anyway, Ryako Music says, time for anti-inflammatory meds. Yeah, I think I need something more stronger than that, but we'll see how it goes. Array of Emotion says, that's some OCD level stuff. Yeah, that's me. So, lesson for this week is if something hurts when you do it, don't do it. So, I think I will probably be concentrating on playing keyboards with my right hand over the following week and leaving the guitars and the basses and the Chapman stick in their rack. Poor little things. Right, housekeeping. Hello if you're watching on Twitch. If you're watching on Twitch, please say hello, please follow me, please do all the things that make Twitch pay attention to the stream. If you're watching this on the archive on YouTube, then thank you very much. That does help my viewing figures. I've put together a playlist of all episodes of the 5090 show, together with a separate playlist of all episodes of my Thursday night Head First Only show, which is more about my creative process and musical stuff and just nerding out. And depending on my friends in the chat, especially Mel and David, we will go down rabbit holes that are unanticipated and likely to be highly amusing at the time. Please subscribe on YouTube. Please click the like button if you like this. It all helps my algorithms. And thank you to those of you who have been watching, because I got an email from YouTube this week and it quite literally used the expression OMG exclamation mark with an animation full of confetti. So I must be doing something right, and thank you for coming along with me. Ryako Music says rabbit holes are fun places. Hell yeah, absolutely. Right, I'm on the verge of feedback here, so I'm just gonna nudge that down a little bit. So this week, both Candle and Marthy Nell said, "Oh, I'd like to know about compressors," when I made a comment in the 5090 forums. Compressors, who knows what they are anyway? So it looks like I am going to be talking about compressors for the next 15, 20 minutes or so. I'm gonna try and keep things a bit shorter. I know you IR on 5090 said these are great, but I can't watch for 2 hours, so I am going to try and cut these down to a manageable size. Array of Emotions Array of Emotions says not me. Ryako Music says nice shirt. Yeah, well, Kubrick Exhibition is touring the world. If you get a chance to see it, go. It is amazing. Right, compressors. I have been doing homework. That's how bad it's got. How bad is it? I have figured out how to do a slideshow using, and I figured out why I couldn't do it in the version of Libre Office that I had up here. It was because I didn't have a copy of Libre Office up here. I was using OpenOffice and it has different controls. Ho-hum. So what I'm going to do, if this works, look at that. It works. Welcome, boys and girls, to the 5090 Show guide to compressors. What are they anyway? So first of all, why do you need compressors? Well, if you're using something like Ableton, if I switch over to Ableton, you may already be familiar with pressing the A key to automate a particular parameter. Say we've got a very, very loud bit of a piece of audio somewhere and a very quiet bit somewhere else, or on this case, I want to turn the speaker off entirely. You can ride the faders using automation and alter the volume control. All well and good, but it can become, and believe me, it does become rapidly very tedious. So when you want to flatten out or compress the dynamic range of your music, you use a compressor. So what is the dynamic range of your music? It is the difference between the quietest part and the loudest part of your track. So this is a sonic representation of one of my tracks. It's actually a track off my last album. In fact, it's the title track off my last album on Eric Tulpa's. If there was nothing going on, there'd be a flat line centered around the 0 mark on this graph. But as you can see, I made noise. And the difference between the quietest sound on this sample and the very loudest sound on this sample is my dynamic range. And that tends to get measured in decibels. But for the time being, I'm going to not explain what decibels are, because that is a rabbit hole down which we do not need to go at this time. Let's just say a decibel is a way of counting how loud something is. So, compressors used to be far more important in controlling dynamic range of music back in the days of vinyl. Why? Because the size of grooves on an LP limited how much music you could put on, and the louder it got, the wider apart you had to put the grooves. And the louder a piece of music got, the more chance there was that the stylus, the needle that is actually playing the music on the record, would skip out of its groove. So quiet stuff you could fit more on a record. This is also why bands would put loud pieces of music on the first couple of tracks on the side of an LP, because that meant it was easier to space tracks around. But an LP, even with spaced out grooves, had a very limited dynamic, well, not very limited, it managed to entertain countless millions of LP buyers for decades, But the dynamic range, the difference between the quietest bit and the loudest bit on a vinyl record, is about 70 dB. A CD's dynamic range is 96 dB undithered and 120 decibels or more dithered. And now you're sitting there wondering what dithering means, aren't you? Go on, hands up. Who wants to know what dithering is? Well, dithering is the idea of adding random noise to something to make it look and sound more detailed. It's a bit like screwing up the anti-aliasing in a JPEG image by making extra noise in it so you don't see the square blocks. Ryako says, I don't really know that much about compressors, even though I use them all the time, so this lesson is helpful. Good. I am glad. So yeah, dithering is a way of adding noise which makes it look like you've added extra detail, and that means that the human ear can actually determine a decibel difference of more than 120 decibels between the loudest part and the quiet part of a CD, which is amazing. And I remember the first time I heard albums that I thought I was familiar with on LP, hear them playing on a CD back in the day when there was no music technology that had that level of dynamic range. It made quite an impact, shall we say. There was swearing. Right, so that's what a compressor is for. What does it do? Well, it reduces the difference between the loudest and the quietest part of the audio. And an expander is the reverse. It increases the difference between the loudest and the quietest part of the audio. And this is really, there we go. So they're two sides of the same coin. They work in exactly the same way. It's just they work on different parts of the audio signal. And we'll come on to what those different parts are right now. If you open a standard compressor in Ableton, you'll see a bunch of controls that look something like this. So this is the mixed gel compressor preset from Ableton Live 10. Lots of stuff, all hieroglyphics, doesn't mean maybe an awful lot. If you're a synth nerd, you've probably figured out what the attack and release mean on the left. But let's cover all of this and explain exactly what it means. The most important part of that interface is the graph, which is known as a transfer function. Its x-axis is the input level in decibels. So the louder your input signal, the further over to the right that orange dot goes, because that orange dot represents what Ableton is hearing from your signal at that moment in time. So the orange dot will slide up and down that blue line. The y-axis of the graph is the output level. So if you didn't do anything within the compressor, the output would be exactly the same as the input level, wouldn't it, right? And if your x-axis and your y-axis have the same units of measurement and the same scale, then that blue line will be exactly a 45-degree slope. Because if you put 12 dB in, you get 12 dB out. All right, with me so far? Okay. A compressor doesn't work. Array of Emotion says, yep, good man. A compressor doesn't always work on the signal. It has a threshold above which it starts to work. So you want the quiet stuff to be left alone. You might actually want the quiet stuff not to be heard at all. But it's the loud stuff that you want to control. It's the stuff that'll make your stylus skip out of its groove that you want to control. Ideally, you want to set a maximum loudness above which you know your audio won't go. The threshold is the point at which the compressor starts to work. And in the little area I've shaded in there, to the left of the threshold, compressor doesn't do anything. It is not affecting the signal that it's listening to. It's only above the threshold that a compressor starts to work. And you can set the threshold in this particular compressor in Ableton with the little slidey box on the left there. So at the moment, the threshold for this mixed gel compressor is set to minus 22.1 decibels. Okay, so that's just, a fairly quiet audio signal. So anything that is quieter than minus 22.1 decibels, compressor ain't going to do a thing. It's just going to pass the signal through as if it wasn't there. Now, when it kicks in, you're likely to notice. And the idea is that you really don't want people to think, oh, he's using a compressor on this track. You really want them to be transparent. You don't want them to be noticeable at all. And to do that, compressor manufacturers introduce something called a knee. So a knee means that the compressor doesn't suddenly kick in at minus 22.1 decibels. It starts working considerably before. In this case, I've got a knee set at 12 decibels. So it's going to start kicking in 12 decibels less than minus 22.1. And it will only fully start working at 12 decibels louder than minus 22.1 decibels. And there are two ways of doing that. So there's a hard knee and a soft knee, in which case the actual transition from almost working to completely working on a hard knee is quite violent and you can hear it kick in. Whereas on a soft knee, especially a wide soft knee, the gradual introduction of what the compressor is doing is intended so that you don't actually notice it's kicked in. Right, how much compression does your sound need? I said earlier that if you had no compression at all, then the blue line on your transfer function graph would be at 45 degrees. And that's kind of where the blue line would be in this image if it went to the top right hand corner of the box, like that. The difference between what you actually get on the right hand edge and a 1-to-1 ratio at the top of the graph is known, strangely enough, as the ratio. So this particular compressor is set up with a ratio of 1.20 to 1. So it reduces the output signal by a ratio of 1.20 to 1. So if your output is 1.20, if your input is 1.20, your output is going to be 1. Other popular ratios 2-to-1. So if your input is 2, your output is 1. Or you can have a 4-to-1, which is if your input is 4, your output is 1. See, it's not rocket science. It might look complicated, but it's actually quite simple. So to reiterate once again, a compressor with a ratio of 1-to-1 won't do a thing. The higher the ratio, the more noticeable the effect you'll get when a compressor kicks in. Now, a limiter is an extreme compressor with a ratio of infinity to 1. What does that mean? Well, in simple terms, it means once the compressor starts kicking in, your input signal could be at infinity. The output line on the transfer function graph is flat, which means that your input signal could be infinitely loud and your output signal would be 1. That's why it's got a ratio of infinity to 1. Obviously, it has to figure out how to do this. So compressors have a reaction time. It's how fast they kick in and how fast they let go. On this version, you can see the attack time on the left. It takes it 12.5 milliseconds before it starts doing anything to the signal. And when it releases over a second after the signal has stopped doing its thing. Those are the two controls there. What does that mean? Okay, here's a waveform of me playing a guitar chord. Again, the 0.0 line is silence. It takes 12.5 milliseconds for the compressor to start doing its thing, which is the attack line there. And then after the guitar chord stops, the signal dies away afterwards, and that's the release. Sometimes you want to make sure that those initial bursts of sound aren't messed up. They're short bursts of sound that occur during a track, usually at things like a drum hit or the percussive bit of striking a guitar chord. They're very important to the perceived quality and character of a sound, and you don't want your compressor ruining them. And in fact, and this is one thing that I didn't learn until quite recently, you do not want your compressor to have an attack time that's like milliseconds. It might sound like a really good idea to have a compressor that reacts almost instantly, but if you think about it, if the signal that your compressor is getting is like a sine wave from a synthesizer, if the compressor kicks in every time the sine wave rises above zero, it's going to mess up your sine wave and ruin your synthesizer signal. So you want to leave the compressor a bit of leeway before it starts to react. Otherwise you will mess up your signal, and you will also mess up things like a snare hit or a kick drum kick with your drum sound. You want to keep your transients, and in fact you can actually enhance your transients with other pieces of software or hardware, and we'll cover transients on another day, because I am totally into enhancing transients in all sorts of interesting ways. There is a great transient shaping tool in Ableton for the drums called Drum Bus, and you would not believe the difference that dropping Drum Bus and its transient shaping enhance tool will do to your drum sound. Okay, so what does the compressor listen to? It listens to the sound that you're making. It listens to your audio signal. But the thing is that electronics quite often listen to things in a very, very different way to how we listen to things with our ears. That's why a lot of compressors have this control, which allows you to switch between a compressor that will react to the peak signal, in other words, the top of the transient that it's listening to, and that's the thing that makes it go, ooh, I need to do something. Or instead, you can get it to listen on an RMS basis, which stands for root mean squared. In other words, the compressor listens to amounts of time of your signal, squares them, averages them out, and then takes the square root and reacts to the root of the mean squared of the audio signal, which is a lot closer to how our ears perceive sound. So if you want your compressor to react naturally in the same way that you might throw your hands over your ears when you hit something loud, then pick RMS. Picking a peak as a trigger for your compressor will make it behave sometimes very differently from how it behaves in RMS. And it will also change the characteristics of the output signal. If you play something through with your compressor set to peak and then play it through again with your same compressor, just change it to RMS and see what a difference it makes. And it's that playing with stuff and changing controls that is so important in learning how these things work. So after you've watched this, grab one of your pieces of music, chuck a compressor on it, and play around with different ratios and the peak and the RMS settings, and see what a difference you can make to the piece of music that you've made. All right, we've said that compressors take time to react. If you've got a really, really fast attack, and this one is 12.5 milliseconds, as you can see on the left, you can cheat because the compressor, you can tell to look ahead because you've got a waveform that's on a track that's already recorded or being processed. The compressor can actually look a certain number of milliseconds ahead, so it's ready to react to the change in signal when the changing signal occurs. And that's why you can get a compressor that will react in a millisecond. Although, for the reasons that I've already explained, you kind of don't want it to do that. Another thing you can do is that you can make the compressor kick in when something else happens on your track. This is known as sidechaining. So you can see I've clicked on the little arrow. Whoops, it's moving the mouse that's causing it. I've clicked on the little arrow next to where it says mildly aggressive, which is actually spelt right. No, it's not spelt right. It's not got enough S's in it, has it? That's shoddy work, Ableton. Shoddy work. You can basically get the compressor to only work when audio from another track on your piece of music either starts or stops. So here I haven't selected one, but you can select the drum track or the bass track. You might want to do that so that whatever's happening in this particular track doesn't get trodden on by the kick drum. You can make the sidechain effect quite noticeable. You can turn up the gain. You can make the sidechain version of the signal 100% of the mix. And if you do that, you get something, or you can get something if you're not careful, called pumping. Sidechaining a compressor with a slow release results in a pumping effect. It used to be a bug, now it's a feature. People make it happen deliberately in a track, particularly if you're into electronic dance music. And in fact, it's become a meme of itself, because that whoop, 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 whoop noise you hear in particular brands of EDM is a compressor sidechaining and actually pumping, because it's kicking in and then letting go and completely changing the character of the track that it's being dropped on. So have a go with sidechaining something. So best bet is sidechain from the kick drum and have your compressed track something like a synth pad, and you'll really notice it if you put it up in the mix. Volume levels. Okay, we've said it's a compressor. So what that means is that the output signal is, by design, quieter than the input signal. That's the whole idea of a compressor, right? The trouble is, in doing that, particularly if you're doing some quite savage compression, you might actually reduce the signal of the piece that's being compressed to the point where you can't hear it anymore. The gain reduction, which is the reduction in volume of the output signal, which on this is shown in a little graph, can be compensated for by kicking the makeup button. So now I guess you're asking why this is a thing. Well, what it means is that you turn up the volume and that brings up the stuff that's not compressed so that it becomes more audible. And when I've finished this, Ryako Music says, I love my wubs. It's, yeah, where would we be without sidechaining? That's all I can say. So yeah, one of the things that I'm going to show as a little, very, very quick impromptu demonstration when I finish the chalk and talk bit. Hey, I worked in learning and development for 40 years. There's got to be a slideshow. one of the things that compression is used for is to even out the volume levels when, say, you're doing a podcast and there's two of you having a conversation and one person is really close to the microphone and quite loud and the other person's off in the room somewhere. And the difference in volume, and I have heard professional podcasts that don't do this, that the person off away from the mic becomes almost inaudible. And it's an easy fix. All you need to do is drop a compressor on the track and problem sorted. So, podcasters, please take note. Use a compressor. Right, from compressors to expanders. Remember where at the start I said an expander was basically the mirror universe version of a compressor. In other words, rather than waiting for something to get really loud and then turning it down, what it actually does is it makes stuff that's quieter louder. An expander is a compressor the other way round. A noise gate is an extreme expander with a ratio of infinity to 1. So, in other words, however quiet something gets, it will always stick at that level. And you can make that level below the level of whatever else you've got in your signal chain responding to. Okay. Beware of presets. Why am I saying this? Things like Ableton come with, a compressor preset called mixed gel, one called mildly aggressive, one called brick wall, which is effectively the same as a limiter. Listen to what the compressor is doing. Don't rely on the preset to do what you think it's going to do. The whole point of doing mixing is to enhance the dynamics and the character and the quality of the work that you're working on. Even if it's a conversation, it doesn't have to be music. Listen to what the compressor is doing to the signal that you're listening to. And if it's not what you're expecting or wanting, then fiddle with it. Adjust accordingly. Ryako Music says, I don't even use compressor presets. Good. That's exactly the right attitude to take. And finally, unless you're deliberately setting out to create that wub 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 effect, the compressor's use really shouldn't be noticeable. The stuff that you're making should just turn out to be nicer to listen to. We talked last week, was it, about the loudness wars? The loudness wars were all about people using compressors to progressively more and more extreme extents and flattening all the life out of a piece of music, which is why that Muse track just ends up a solid orange box when you get to the end of Take a Bow. Ryako Music says, the loudness wars were evil. They were indeed. Well, that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this presentation on compressors. Thank you very much for watching. So, got through that all right. Still not sure why that is doing strange things with... I was changing slides by moving the mouse on the other screen. So, go figure. Right, it's demo time. I've got Ableton set up just with its default 2 MIDIs, 2 audio tracks. I've got my shiny new audio interface keyed up to track number 3, which is a mono audio input. And what I am going to do is I'm going to turn on my Rode microphone, which is a large diaphragm condenser microphone, and you can see it in that shot. It's the thing, the silvery thing right next to the Marshall. And what I'm going to do for the next minute or so is I am going to pretend to be two people having a podcast conversation. So I'm going to start Ableton recording. I have to say that podcasts do not normally need accounting. But there you are. You can see the audio waveform picking up what I'm saying. Now, my rig has two separate compressors built into it just by default, and they're hardware compressors. There's one on my desk and there's one in my infamous little floor pedal called Mic Mechanic, and I'm going to turn both of those off for the purposes of this demonstration. So I'm just going to do that, and then I'm going to go over to the road and I'm going to pretend to be a famous podcaster. So here comes the compression down on all my mics. And that's the tone turned off on my Mic Mechanic. And you can hear I sound completely different even through the SM7B. So let's go over to my Rode NT1A and do a podcast. So here we are, and here's the very charismatic and debonair presenter of the podcast, talking very closely to a very nice, very shiny Rode NT1A. And he's about to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here and is very, very, very flattered to have been asked to be on the show. At which point, our debonair presenter asks the guest a question. And over here, the guest doesn't look at the microphone and turns away from it, so becomes even more quiet than he was when he was talking to the microphone. And yes, people do that, including yours truly, especially when he's talking at the Shure SM7B. Well, thank you very much, says our debonair presenter. That was really informative. And tune in again at the same time next week. Okay. You should be able to see from the waveform just what a massive difference there is in the speech of the presenter, which is this guy here, and the speech of his guest. There is a massive difference in sound quality. And talking of massive differences in sound quality, I'm going to turn the compressors back on. Oh, that's better. I feel quite naked without a compressor. Goodness me. All right. Noirjaya says, squee! Mel says, why does the guest get the weenie girl voice? Yeah, I'm just running with it. Just indulge me. Array of Emotions says, debonair presenter should be part of your regular repertoire. Say no more. Okay, so remember when I started this diatribe about signals and audio and noises? Ooh, just a little bit of feedback. Turn myself down a bit. I said that in Ableton you can turn on automation and you can what is known as ride the faders. So if I start playing here,
a presenter of the podcast talking very closely to a very nice, very shiny Rode NT1A, and he's about to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here, and he's...
So you can hear the difference. There's also a lot of room noise. Now what I could do is I can just insert breakpoints here, and then I can take the section of the audio where the presenter is talking and move it like that. So I can increase it, so that's what, 5.2 dB, and it will make it sound a
and he's
little
about
better.
to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here, and he's very, very, very flattered to have been asked to be on the show.
You get the idea. It's finicky, and in some cases, especially when you've got loads of different people talking, I'm going to delete that automation. It becomes almost impossible to control the relative signal levels. Also, notice our debonair presenter is a bit of a mouthy git, and he does get very loud. So there may be what is known as clipping, where he exceeds the capacity of the microphone. Although it is a very nice and shiny microphone, he might actually blow the capacity of the microphone and cause distortion by the signal peaking beyond the dynamic range of the mic. But we're here to talk about compressors. So what I am going to do is I am going to select just one of the stock audio effects compressors from Ableton Live 10. What am I going to use? I'm just going to start off with the gentle squeeze compressor, and all I do is I just drop it onto that audio effect. There it is at the bottom. As you saw with the other stuff, it's got a transfer function. Its ratio, I don't know if you can see that on your screens, but its ratio is 1.88 to 1. So it's nearly 2 to 1. So it nearly halves the input sound when it comes out. It's got a 12 decibel knee. It's doing a 1 millisecond look ahead, and it's already set to RMS, which is what we want because that gives a more human response to what's going on as the result of the processing that's carried out. As you can see, the attack is very fast. It's 1 millisecond. And the release time, the time where the compressor goes, all right, yeah, you can just go through as normally now, is 100 milliseconds. So now we've dropped that compressor onto the track. Let's hear what it sounds like.
Very closely to a very nice, very shiny Rode NT1A, and he's about to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here, and he's very, very, very flattered to have been asked to be on the show.
So I don't know if you...
At which point our debonair presenter...
Yes, thank you. I don't know if you could see that, but there's a small orange dot that travels up and down the transfer line that tells you where the current audio signal was. And our guest, when he's talking at his normal volume level, barely reaches the lower knee of the compressor. So what does that mean? It means we have to move the threshold, which is this slider on the left. So if I play that section again, when the guest starts talking, I'm going to slide the threshold down until his speech is basically straddling the big orange dot, which is the threshold itself of the compressor. So it's when things really start to bite on the compressor. And if it was a hard knee compressor, then I want the guest's voice to sit somewhere around this orange dot. So let's give it a go.
very closely to a very nice, very shiny Rode NT1A, and he's about to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here, and he's very, very, very flattered to have been asked to be on the show. At which point, our debonair presenter asks the guest a question. And over here, the guest doesn't look at the microphone and turns away from it, so becomes even more quiet than he was when he was talking to the microphone. And yes, people do that, including yours truly, especially when he's talking at the Shure SM7B. Well, thank you very much, says our debonair presenter. That was really informative. So you get the idea. Obviously, with something like this, I would do an awful lot of other fiddling and messing about to do things like reduce the room noise for the guest, and maybe rein in some of the debonair presenter's more mellifluous tones. I think he probably needs a lot more EQ, and he should probably back away from his Shure SM7B a little bit. But that kind of gives you an idea of what compression is used for. A lot of people say that software compressors like this are a poor second to actually having hardware compression. And I guess if you've invested $2,000 or $3,000 in a nice shiny hardware compressor, then that's probably true for you. And I have a Phil Jones bass amplifier under the desk, which actually has a compressor, a hardware compressor built into it, because a bass in particular has a very, very wide dynamic range, particularly when you have something like this, which is very all about the slap. Misses. So a lot of guitar amps and bass amps have compression built in, and still you'll hear, strange things going on. You think that really could do with a bit of compression. So the next time you're working on a track, listen to what you're doing and listen to the dynamic range, and the way the dynamic range changes through the tracks that you're doing. Listen to your transients. Listen how those affect what is going on with the track, and use the tools that come with your DAW. Cakewalk has compression built in, and Cakewalk's free. Reaper has compression built in. There are bucket loads of free compressors, software compressors, VST compressors that you can download for your DAW. And in fact, if I go to this, if I get rid of my Ableton plugin, I've got some really nice ones that are free that I got from Native Instruments. So here's a solid bus compressor. What does this sound like? Let's play that same section again. Very shiny Rode NT1A, and he's about to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here, and he's very, very, very flattered to have been asked to be on the show. At which point, our debonair presenter asks the guest a question. And over here, the guest doesn't look at the microphone and turns away from it, so becomes even more quiet than he was when he was talking to the microphone. And yes, people do that, including yours truly, especially when he's talking at the Shure SM7B.
Ryako Music says, ooh, it's got a cool interface. Yeah, as so many VSTs do. But yeah, I do like I'm always a sucker for a good bit of brushed aluminium. You can't beat, a nice shiny box with a brushed aluminium front and lots of knobs to twiddle. So once again, you hear the result is that your audio is easier to listen to. If I bypass it by just clicking on this button, when this button is no longer glowing orange, then my solid bus comp is not working. Just listen for what a difference it makes.
Closely to a very nice, very shiny Rode NT1A. And he's about to welcome his special guest. And his special guest is over here and is very, very, very flattered to have been asked to be on the show. At which point, our debonair presenter asks the guest a question. And over here, the guest doesn't look at the microphone and turns away from it, so becomes even more quiet than he was when he was talking to the microphone. And
you get the idea. So a compressor can save an audio take that you make from being completely useless to being totally good enough to use. All right, you're going to have to work on it for other reasons, but don't be afraid to use compression in your stuff, because it will help tremendously. And one of the things that I do when I'm making a piece of music, while I'm talking to you, I am just opening the last piece of music that I uploaded to 5090 this afternoon. This is my 8th track so far this year, so I'm one track behind the game at the moment. But this track has a whole bunch of synths. It has 2 tracks of guitars. It has 3 tracks of vocals. And I was talking on Thursday about a wonderful, wonderful VPROM drum machine that I kind of splashed out on this week. €45. It is, although Ali James tends not to use the actual trade name, a emulation, and I'll call up the interface because on the 5090 show we are all about the interfaces. It's called VPROM, and it's an emulation of Roger Lynn's original LM1 drum kit. Why is this of interest to me? And you guys are going to freak as soon as you hear the snare sound, because the snare sound, when I heard this, it was like, yep, okay, I want this, got to have this. Here we go. So Ali was helped to make sure that sound was as close as it could be, although obviously Mr. Minneapolis tweaked it a lot in the studio. Ali has some tracks on his website, and I'll put the link up in YouTube, working with Dr. Fink himself from the Revolution. So these are Prince's EEPROMs from his Lynn drum machine. But if I put the whole thing together, what I'm going to do is show you why I got into this conversation in the first place. See, this thing here is a maximizer, and a maximizer is kind of a limiter, which remember is a compressor where everything, no matter how loud it is, will not go. Sorry, you do not need to hear my vocals at the same time as my vocals. A maximizer basically takes a limiter to extremes and said, okay, I'm going to listen to what you've got. I'm going to squish it. And you can see there's a little thing there. At no point will it let any of the audio go past minus 0.3 dB above true peak. And that is the industry standard ceiling for stuff like a CD. So I always master so that my ceiling is minus 0.3 dB. The threshold of the limiter on this one is only 0.1 of a dB below that. And remember I said how changing the threshold can change the quality of the sound? Let me just start this track again and I'll move the threshold lower and see what it does to the audio. This is the tool that caused the loudness wars, because people wanted their track to sound louder than everybody else's track on the radio, but that minus 0.3 decibel limit for the loudest part of that signal has not changed. There's nothing getting to your signal coming out of your computer that has become louder. It's just much more compressed, and that's what compression will do if you're silly with it. So don't be silly with it, please. Be sensible. Array of Emotions says boo. Yeah, quite. So that's kind of about it. We've been going about an hour. I've covered everything I wanted to cover. I hope this has been useful in terms of explaining why using compressors is cool and everybody should be doing it, and why using compressors is also hideous and they are the spawn of Satan and should never be allowed anywhere near your musical equipment. You've got one viewpoint, you've got the other. You pays your money and you takes your choice. And really what it comes down to is these things. Listen to what results you get with the compressor and without the compressor. And if you prefer what you're doing without a compressor, don't use a compressor. Ryako Music says, thank you for teaching us, Professor Harris. I actually, when I taught at university, lots of people called me Professor Harris, and it was kind of embarrassing because I don't have a PhD. However Motion. Same goes for Rick Rubin. Yeah, but Rick Rubin did a lot of good, it has to be said, for the music industry, and a lot of the music that he brought us was really kick-ass. I think we can forgive him for some of the loudness wars. And equally, you know, Steve Jobs may have done a lot of egregious things in his time, but Apple Music were the people who stopped the loudness wars dead in their tracks. And going back to my little screen one here, nowadays, see this bit here? There is actually a target LUFS figure, which is, it's LUFS is the measurement of loudness. So Apple's minus 14.0 LUFS loudness target is now baked in to the tools that people use when they're making music. It's good to see, and it's something that you actually have to physically and deliberately disable to stop it happening, and I think that's a good thing, and it can only make your music sound better. So go out there and make some music. And Ryako Music, oh, Noir says, I have been dancing. That is praise indeed, thank you very much. And Ryako Music says dancing is always a good idea, unless you're me, in which case I'll just be content sitting at one of those things, or when this is healed up, playing a guitar and making the sounds that other people want to dance to. Sound like a deal? Well, I'm making mac and cheese and he gave me a soundtrack, Noah says. Chris, we got to see you dance now, says Ryako Music. Not in my current state. That would be unwise, shall we say. Not only do I have an elbow brace, I have an ankle brace, and I also have a shoulder brace because I am a wreck. Hey ho, I'll be 60 next month, and I'm feeling it, but we soldier on, and sitting in here is a way I make myself feel good. Ryako Music says, where's the full body cast? There have been times when I've gone skiing where I've very nearly ended up needing one. So, yeah, let's not do that. Okay, I am going to call it a night. Thank you very much for being on this journey of learning with me, or learning journey even. I think there's a company I've worked with have actually trademarked that, so maybe we'll call this a journey of learning. Thank you very much for tuning in. I hope it was useful. I hope it was entertaining. If it was neither, then I hope you just had fun laughing at me waffling on for an hour and a bit about stuff that I kind of know about. Ryako Music says, thanks for the lesson. Nuaja says, thank you, good night. Thank you all. Until next time, which will be Thursday at 7:30 p.m. BST for the standard headfirst only television show. Stay well, stay safe, and stay sane. And I'll see you next time.